Welcome to Squaring the Strange, the podcast that examines all manner of the mysterious and the mundane through a critical lens. So, let's square the strange. Hello, gang. We are talking about something which I've been wanting to get to for many, many years now. Now that we've been doing the show for, forever, it seems like. And that is Bigfoot tracks. We've talked about Bigfoot on the show before. We talked about the Skookum cast, the notorious Bigfoot butt print, which we'll be touching on a little bit. But I want to talk about Bigfoot tracks, specifically, not so much the eyewitnesses, not so much the DNA, all the other stuff, but the most recognizable form of Bigfoot evidence for most people, other than the 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film, tracks themselves. So to begin with it,
we have a guest.
We have a guest. We do have a guest. Yes.
Who is our person in the studio here?
We have our person. Yes. So some of you are watching this, and others of you are listening to this on the audio podcast. If you are fortunate enough, or that is you threw us a couple bucks, you are actually seeing this, seeing the three of us. The three of us being me, Celestia, and Matt Crowley, who's been on the show before. Matt, hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon there.
Now, you are famous for a few things, Matt.
You are
infamous. You're infamous for a few things.
Probably true.
Well, so I want to touch on that. So the last time you were on the show, we've had you on at least once or twice. And the main one I remember was, of course, you invented the condom snorting challenge, which I think is just cool inherently. I mean, it's just, to be in the presence of somebody who not only invented this, but did this not just once, not just like a party trick, like, hey, let me turn this into a thing. So you're there for that. So here's the thing. So I know that you were formerly a pharmacist. You were formerly touring with the sideshow of the Jim Rose Circus, in the Circus of the Scars. This is the last time we had you on for that. But you're also a fairly accomplished Bigfoot researcher, which is an odd medley of things. What got you into this?
Oh, I was interested from childhood. My mother was interested in Bigfoot. She read things like Fate magazine, and she would tell me about it. When I was 9, I was given a gift, which was a copy of John Green's book, On the Track of the Sasquatch. And I read it and was completely convinced at age 9 of this thing. In fact, I was so fascinated by this subject, I was confused as to why all the little kids in my grade school weren't similarly fascinated, because to me it just seemed amazing. By the time I got to high school, I was actually kind of upset because they hadn't found Bigfoot, right? It just seemed like any moment now they're going to find Bigfoot, but it didn't happen. And I became interested in other things. By about 2000, I saw a short video on the internet of the discovery of the Skookum cast. And I thought, wow, I haven't thought about Bigfoot in a very long time. What's this all about? And with the internet, I found a forum called Bigfoot Forums. And I thought, wow, here are these people like myself who are interested in this arcane subject. And I became interested in the broader subject. I read most of the top books on the subject. I'd also seen a video documentary called, I'm blanking on the name. It's Doug Hychek's video.
Legend Meets Science or something like that?
Yeah, that's right. Legend Meets Science. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Legend Meets Science. And that had a segment on a fingerprint investigator in Texas examining footprint casts that supposedly had dermal ridges. And I went on very long, deep investigation of my own in that, and was invited to present that at a conference in 2005. A gentleman named Daniel Perez, who runs a newsletter called Bigfoot Times, decided the presentation was strong enough, so he made me Bigfooter of the Year 2005.
Bigfooter of the Year 2005. Congratulations.
Yes, I was. That's going on. That's going on the tombstone. Absolutely.
now, now I want to ask about something there. You mentioned that you got on Bigfoot forums, and the internet came about like as the Bigfoot was really I wouldn't call it arcane. It was pretty mainstream. It was showing up on the $6 Million Man. Everybody I remember just talking about Bigfoot in the 80s and 90s. They had the films inspired by Bigfoot, et cetera, et cetera. And then the internet shows up. And do you think the Bigfoot community, I mean, were the Bigfooters some of the first people to take advantage of like, oh, I found my people on the internet?
As far as I know about it, yes. It seemed like a great dome. Someone's got to pay money to get a web access for a forum, so somebody's got to pay some money. But there are enough people interested in doing that where that occurred. So the internet just seemed like a beautiful place for marginalized people interested in kind of marginal esoteric subjects. They had the Usenet before that, but this was a much better, a much more sophisticated way of communicating with people with this arcane interest. So yeah, I think it was a godsend to the Bigfoot subculture.
And was there this expectation of like, okay, now we're connected all over the world. Somebody somewhere is going to find him or her, and we will be proved triumphant.
I can't speak to other so-called researchers because I think that
Yeah.
I think the subculture is ruthless as far as like I'm going to be the person to do this.
Right.
I'm going to be the man to discover. Someone like Renee DeHinden was overt in stating that, right? But it's my opinion that it's a status game, and these people are gaming the system to be the number one person in this subculture with the idea that, well, yes, I'll eventually find Bigfoot, find the one definitive piece of proof that the mainstream scientific subculture will acknowledge.
So it's more competitive than it is a collective.
Oh, I believe so. Absolutely.
Yeah, it can be very, very cutthroat. And I think, to the best of my knowledge, Matt is the only skeptic that has ever been recognized as Bigfooter of the Year by Perez.
Oh,
I could be
bravo.
wrong about that, but certainly.
At To be fair, at the time in about 2005, I described myself publicly as agnostic on the subject, and that is an accurate description. I felt there was so much about the subject that I was ignorant of, and I wanted to read all the books and examine all the points, really drill down, as they say. Um, my own my own discovery of the prosaic explanation of the dermal ridges actually didn't even make me a skeptic. What made me a complete skeptic was the analysis of the Skookum cast,
Mhm.
and that's a whole story in and of itself. But that kind of made that the the shades dropped, right?
The whole house of cards just collapses.
The curtain was parted, and the great Oz was revealed.
I should note, Skookum Cast was our entire episode 98, which was back in 2019. You could see that episode. You could hear that episode on Squaring the Strange when we have Matt explain it brilliantly. But we will touch on it along with dermal ridges. For anybody wondering what are dermal ridges, maybe somebody who has not gotten knee deep in the Bigfoot waters yet, what is a dermal ridge?
So it's also called friction ridge skin. Most people are familiar with that in terms of fingerprints, but we have the same friction ridge skin on our feet. Many people don't know that that skin is also found on, I believe, all primates, and kind of that texture on koala bears, right? But so the idea is that we assume that if Bigfoot is a primate, and we assume that's a safe assumption, that a primate would leave dermal ridges in at least some of these tracks if the substrate is able to hold that fine of a texture. And that became a whole line of investigation that's still ongoing today. So it's friction ridge skin like fingerprints.
Fingerprints, like literally looking for fingerprints of or toe prints of Bigfoot.
Yep.
And that's good. It's interesting that we have that in common with koalas. That's two things. We share fingerprints and chlamydia with koalas. Good to know.
I do not share chlamydia with koalas, so maybe you do. Speak for yourself.
I mean, as a species.
Oh, okay, fine, whatever. Well, look, I want to sort of do a forest for the trees thing here for a second. So, you know, of course, Bigfoot is named for what it leaves behind, right? Big feet, big footprints. That's that is the nom de plume or the raison d'etre or whatever I'm searching for. And of course it's interesting, right? Because it is ostensibly physical evidence, right? It's not a sighting, it's not something blurry out of the corner of your eye. Something made this impression, right? Every contact leaves a trace. And so the question then becomes, okay, well, there is a an impression in sand, in mud, in snow, whatever it is. And the question is, okay, well, number one, is it actually a track? Because it might not be a track at all. It might just look like a track. If it is a track, what animal made it? And of course, there's all sorts of layers of, like, all these things have to be aligned for this to actually be a Bigfoot track, right? So it could be a hoax, it could be some other impression. And then the question, of course, becomes, if you're in the woods, or in the snow or something, and you see a series of impressions in the substrate, why would you why would you go to, oh, Bigfoot, Yeti, right? What is the context in which you're interpreting these otherwise ambiguous impressions as, oh, well, clearly a Bigfoot walked through here, right? And so that's always one of the sort of the fundamental questions that often sort of gets overlooked among Bigfooters. Is, they're so busy saying, here's the tracks, you can see this, you can see that. You're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Dial it back here. Hold on, Bucky. Why exactly are you so sure this is a Bigfoot track, as opposed to any number of other animals that might be as well? So the other thing I want to point out, sort of before we go in too deep in the weeds here, is that the consistency of Bigfoot tracks are pretty wildly overstated, right? So we see this all the time. Like, oh, well, of course, Lauren Coleman in his books, he talks about, well, there are all these big size, these oversized feet. But the fact is that if you actually take a deeper look at it, you find that there's lots of inconsistency. I mean, some alleged Bigfoot tracks have 5 toes, some have 3. Actually happen to have I have one from a Bigfoot-like creature, the the Honey Island swamp monster, which
Oh, Ben, for anybody who can't see this, Ben is holding up, are those plaster casts
it is a plaster cast of, yes,
in a
it
protective
is,
little tub? I like how you've got it preserved there. How many do
yes,
you
there you go.
have?
I bought 2. This is one broke.
Okay.
I It's under suspicious circumstances. I dropped it. But this is the one that I trot out, and so there's we could do a whole show on the Honey Island swamp monster. That's a whole, like the giant 15-foot penguin that Dan Loxton into, like the Skookum cast. That's a whole other story. But anyway, so my point here is that I'm holding up this thing, and this is, again, not Bigfoot, but certainly what you find is there's this sort of lumping, right, where any bipedal thing that someone doesn't know what it is, oh, it must be a Bigfoot. But again, the point here is that the tracks are not nearly as consistent as Bigfoot believers would like you to think. So, and then the question comes, well, hold on here, like, are there, if let's just assume, let's just take them at their word that all these tracks are actually made by real animals, right? So, okay, so the tracks that have 3 toes, is that the same species of Bigfoot that has 6 toes or 5? I mean, 4. I mean, how does this work? Is this a species of Bigfoot that just happened to? It just
Cats and humans also sometimes have different numbers of digits.
yes, the polydactyls. I think Hemingway's cats are famous for that.
Yes, I know a guy with 6 toes on each foot. It's a real thing,
Well, yeah, but okay, but here's the thing. So is he?
and maybe I'm just playing Bigfoot advocate here.
You're being an avocado Bigfoot avocado wildlife,
Apologist? I'm
whatever.
being a Bigfoot toe apologist.
Well, here's the thing, right? So, okay, so here's the thing: does his family have? I mean, and if we're, as long as we're talking about deformities, and I hate to use the word, but freaks, Matt is the guy to talk to. Matt, you've talk about that.
Oh, you're going to segue. We didn't mention this at the top of the show, but Ben, you are, Matt, you are a little famous for a trick you did involving your gastric juices.
That's right. Yeah. So my nickname is Matt the Tube. That was my sideshow performer name. I took thin, flexible, pliable tubing and put it in my nose and snaked it into my stomach. Then we pumped liquid into the stomach and then pumped it back out. And sometimes the audience was so inflamed by this demonstration of human activity that they would drink the contents of my stomach. And on Lollapalooza, a various set of rock stars started doing this. The first of which was Chris Cornell.
And Eddie Vedder too.
Eddie Vedder did it.
Has ingested your bile.
Yeah, 4 times.
Oh my god!
It's a grunge rock footnote.
Yeah. If anybody gets that,
I didn't really want to get into that, but thank you for.
I'm sorry.
That
was worth it alone to watch your facial expression, Ben. On video, I actually get to see your reactions there.
I'm not particularly squeamish, but that is that's
okay.
I don't
I
don't need to see that. Let's just move on.
We'll move back to the footprints.
Yes,
I gotta say,
and if there's any, and we will not be, just in case anyone's wondering, we will not be showing any footage of that.
No. The
unless it's on Letterman. Were you on Letterman doing that?
No.
Okay, thank God. Okay, moving on. I thought we go into like the dramatis personae, right? Sort of giving an overview, because you mentioned John Green to Hendon. I thought we might just spend a few minutes sort of surveying the big names in Bigfoot.
Tell me about the key players here, the Bigfoot feeders.
So the name Bigfoot hit the public consciousness in 1958 because there were a series of I believe there were about 18-inch tracks, huge tracks found on a newly created roadway up in Bluff Creek in Northern California. And a gentleman who worked at the site named Jerry Crew had the presence of mind to bring some plaster of Paris and cast one of these tracks. He took it to the local newspaper, and that was kind of the birth point of the meme of Bigfoot. The name Sasquatch comes further back in time to about 1926, I think, in Canada, but the word Bigfoot really 1958, and that is from a track. So that track is a legendary starting point for the subculture of Bigfoot, 1958.
And I feel like they're having another moment now. These casts, these plaster casts, are now a highly sought after like kitsch item. Like people who like to do their houses as mid-mod, paradises. And there's one at the Golden Tiki here in Las Vegas. You can see a Bigfoot casting. I'm sure it's fake. Maybe.
What?
Well, I mean, seeing whether or not it's fake, like, is it fake or is it fake? I mean, was it made in China, or is it an actual American hoaxed and then purchased at auction type of Bigfoot impression print?
There is a sort of a cottage industry of making cast copies. I'm not sure it's on this recording, but earlier Ben held up a cast copy of, I believe, a Patterson footprint. Roger, that's correct. That looks to me to be a Roger Patterson footprint from 1967.
It is.
So so at this point, it's, in my opinion, it's a good note to make an allusion to art, Celestia, because in fine art, if you look at a painting and it looks like something that you've seen before, you can say, well, that's a Matisse, or that's a Van Gogh. It's because there are class characteristics of Van Gogh that are different from that of a Matisse, right? And sometimes they're striking, as Ben alludes, with 3 toes or 6 toes. Most, of course, are 5 toes, but you start to develop an eye, like, oh yeah, that's from a certain place. So my argument is that this is what we would call folk art. In my default opinion, all tracks are fake. They are made by what we would call folk artists.
Oh yeah.
My definition of folk art is art that you learn not by going to school. You can't go to a university to learn how to make wooden prosthetics to make fake Bigfoot tracks. So these are creations of American and Canadian folk artists. The 1958 Jerry Crew track was the standard for a very, very long time. In 2002, a gentleman named Ray Wallace died, and his family revealed a menagerie of what they call stompers. These are carved wooden feet that are attached to a person's foot, and the person goes out in the
Yes.
world and makes fake tracks. And one of the photographs that we may be able to get to indeed has a photo. It's not a dead match. You know, you have to, you can't be positive, but it has a very strong shape resemblance to the 1958 Jerry Crew track.
I love how this idea of thinking about it as folk art, it also kind of merges in with performance art, because these are done. I mean, it's something they go out into the world and they do.
Well, you know, I would see parallels. I mean,
That's right.
The parallels that strike me would be crop circles, right? I mean, where, you know, in the case of crop circles, we know what made the only way that crop circles are known to be made is by people. That is the only known origin. Certainly, there can be indentations in crops. There can be water spouts can cause damage, this and that. But at the end of the day, I mean, crop circles, they're, you know, like Matt's saying, they're a form of folk art, and should be seen in that light. And I point this out to somebody, and she's like, yeah, I agree. And then she follows up with, boy, those aliens are artists. I'm like, no, you completely right. She's like, no. Anyway, so Matt, sort of, you mentioned Ray Wallace. One of the things interesting about what the crew found was that you know, again, he's out there, he's in the wilderness, and he sees these tracks, and they look like literally large footprints, because, you know, Bigfoot presumably isn't wearing shoes. So if you're seeing, what else is going to be leaving these huge, you know, 14, 17 inch, 18 inch tracks? So it's sort of like, what else could it be but Bigfoot? And what's interesting about that is that so Jerry Crew and his team find these tracks, and again, keep in mind that this is sort of big before Bigfoot is a thing. I mean, that was what made Bigfoot a thing. So it's not like, oh, this must be what I saw on $6 Million Man the other night. This was sort of the origin. And to Crew and others who heard his story, it was very plausible, because he'd be like, we're in the middle of nowhere. We're in the wilderness. Like, this is not, they're putting roads through the wilderness. Like, who and why would somebody come up to this remote place and like fake these tracks? It was just so beyond the pale. And it reminds me of, and Celeste, you're gonna remember this. When Teller, magician Teller, talks about how one of the most effective ways to make a magic effect, is to do something that requires more time and effort than they assume that you would put into it. Right? So
Yes.
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 It takes is someone to say, no one would ever put in that much effort into make, like, no. That right there.
It raises the question of what's the ratio of people who put fake Bigfoot, of people who put fake Bigfoot prints out into the world. Do they have to make 1,000 for every one that is discovered? Or, I mean, because you got wind, you got erosion, you got the fact that people just don't walk around in some areas of the wilderness. And it's a cooperative effort. You need the person who put the prints down with their giant foot stompers or whatever. And then you need a second person, an unknown person, to come along and cast the track.
Or at least discover it and make a big deal about it.
Discover it and make a big deal out of it. So you have this cooperative effect going on, unless, Matt, are there any Bigfoot trackers who actually do the stomping themselves and then, look what I discovered, then they actually discover it and they're just clear, flat out hoaxing when they find it and do a casting of it?
Well, yes. The most likely candidate for that person would have been Paul Freeman. So Paul Freeman dominated 80s Bigfooting. He was in Walla Walla, Washington, and he claimed a lot of things. He claimed multiple sightings. He found a variety of tracks, or claimed he found a variety of tracks. He made, I think, 2 videos of Bigfoot, and he got some still photographs. So
Mhm.
it was kind of like, for most human beings, an experience where they said, well, I saw Bigfoot. It was kind of like winning the lottery. It's kind of a 1 in a million thing. It's an extremely rare event. But Freeman was one of these guys who was like these UFO experiencers, these UFO contactees, where they're contacted by the space aliens on a regular basis. Well, Paul Freeman was
Oh.
a guy who was intersecting with Bigfoot on a regular basis. Other pro Bigfoot advocates, including Rene DeHinden, Bob Titmus, and Peter Byrne, actually went on site to investigate Paul Freeman, and all 3 of them came away with the conclusion that he was a fraud. However, both Grover Krantz and Jeff Meldrum, who are academics, still to this day, well, Krantz is deceased, but Meldrum to this day advocates that this Paul Freeman stuff was real. Oh, and Paul Freeman had a butt print about, I think, 7 years before the Skookum cast. So first butt print actually was a Paul Freeman thing, but that
Oh.
Paul Freeman is its own issue of discussion, and there are ways which the layperson can examine the tracks that are associated with Freeman and realize, oh yeah, those are clearly fraudulent.
Now, does the presence of clear fraud actually kind of psychologically bolster the stuff that's not so clearly fraud? I mean, if you have these obvious fakes, does the community then say, well, oh yeah, those are fake, but look at these have got dermal ridges and blah blah blah, and you know?
Well, and that's true. That's a part of it, and it's also, in my opinion, it's a status game. And these people game this not the game. They compete for who is the most authoritative voice on the subject, right? And in my opinion, Jeff Meldrum sits at that atop that pyramid now, and so that's why there's so much traction to this day for some of this Paul Freeman stuff, because it's still advocated by Meldrum. But there is controversy and conflict even amongst advocates as to what constitutes a
Yeah,
real
and
track.
there's and Meldrum is an interesting character. I mean, both Matt and I have met Jeff, and he's a nice enough guy. I think we talked about him last time. But it is, he sort of I I sometimes forget that we're kind of sort of inside baseball or Bigfoot. But so Meldrum is a I think he's an anthropologist, right? Is that the I think that's his background.
No, I think he's a primate anatomist. I think.
Right. And so in after Grover Krantz died, Grover was sort of the main scientific Bigfooter for many years, and then he died a while back. I think if I'm not mistaken, his skeleton is in the Smithsonian, along with his his dog, which is a curious little aside. But anyway, so after Krantz died, and I mean, to give Krantz and to some extent Meldrum credit, I mean, they, the whole field is rife with, let's just face, fraud, con men. Some listeners may remember the Bigfoot body hoax. We had Steve Culls on the show a couple years back talking about his participation in the Bigfoot body. We talked about the Minnesota Iceman. We had Ron Pine talking, excellent overview, that sort of thing. So again, the field is just rife with sketchy people coming up with sketchy stuff, and because of that background, anybody that is sort of not self-evidently sketchy, or has degrees, such as Meldrum and Krantz, are, like Matt said, they're the marquee, they're the pinnacle, they're the apex. And I think, in Meldrum's case, I mean, he has been very clearly associated with with self-evident con men. I mean, and it is frankly astonishing to me, because if Meldrum is as convinced that Bigfoot exists, and if he is as sincere about trying to get to the bottom of it, why the hell are you endorsing and working with at least two people that I can think of who are clearly hoaxers? I mean, that's, Jeff should be running as far away from them as possible. Instead, he appears on TV shows with them. So,
Could I ask, as somebody who's not in the swamp as deeply as you two have been, I've never been Bigfooter of the year, or even the month or the week, but could you give me a timeline of like who was the earliest Bigfoot print hoaxer or folk artist, however you want to put it? Early, sort of like who started it, who was big in the 40s and 50s and 60s and on to today? What are the big names in terms of chronological order?
Well, so the name Sasquatch appears to have appeared in about, I think it's about 1926. There was a Canadian journalist who adopted a indigenous term and anglicized it to Sasquatch, right? But there was no physical evidence that I know of, especially plaster casts, until 1958. So 1958 really is year one for Bigfoot. That's where the term Bigfoot really was exploded, and that's where you came with the plaster cast. But so the big point about where the plaster cast was found was, again, it was on a road that was being built through Northern California, through Bluff Creek.
Yep.
Humboldt County, I think, and it was on a road crew who was managed by Ray Wallace. Okay, and so that name becomes greatly important again in 1967. So in 1958, but then in 1967, another road was being built through Northern California, and more tracks were being found. And these tracks differed morphologically from the crew tracks. They were shorter. I think they were either 14 and a half inches long, and they had a very characteristic shape, and they were called double ball. So the ball of one's foot, a human being, is usually just kind of a circular thing, but these had this double weird shape and very characteristic. And when Ray Wallace died in, I believe, 2002, the family showed these prosthetics. And one of the prosthetics, it was real close up, is a very good, solid, clear image of one of the family members holding up both the left and the right, 14-inch double ball. And they were an absolute dead match because the prints were made in very, very fine, dry soil, very dusty. It was very hot that summer in Bluff Creek, very, very fine, dusty soil, and it preserved detail to a very fine degree. And both John Green and Rene de Hinden were on site at that time. There's an entire book on this subject entitled The Abominable Snowman of Northern California by a gentleman named Dustin Seaver. It's a really, really outstanding book. Dustin Seaver should have been Bigfooter of the Year. Sadly, he was not, but he deserves the title because it was an outstanding book, and he really goes in great depth about the history of this event. But it set off a real firestorm because to many people it was just obvious that these were hoaxes because they came out with the prosthetics. Yet these diehards said, no, this is a second fake. This is a second fake out. They carved the prosthetics after they saw the tracks, things like that. And so we will talk later in the episode about the Elb tracks, to where we get kind of a proof of concept that stomped wooden prosthetics really do fool Bigfooters.
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that as Matt mentioned, I mean the Ray Wallace tracks are basically, it's undeniable they're hoax. I mean, it could not be unless someone had video of him doing it. I mean, there's no doubt in anyone's mind that at least some of the tracks. Now, people like Lauren Coleman will argue, well, okay, maybe some are fake, but other ones aren't. Well, okay, well, hold on. What's your criteria? Why? How exactly? What are the points of contention where you're so sure that these are legit, but these over here are clearly clearly hoax. And so it's interesting that that many prominent Bigfooters, including John Green, who Matt mentioned earlier, and Grover Krantz, they basically just pretended that the Ray Wallace didn't exist.
Huh.
I mean, they just sort of like they didn't want to hear it. It just was like they it was so devastating, certainly to the early tracks. Now keep in mind, of course, the fact that Ray Wallace very clearly faked a whole bunch of tracks in 58 and even earlier than that. That doesn't mean that tracks found in 1982 aren't real, of course, but but because those are the tracks that literally made Bigfoot. These are them, guys. This is like, and you know, I'll circle back for a second to the Chupacabra case, right? I mean, the Chupacabra case traces back to one sighting in 95 Puerto Rico. If you can explain that one sighting, then all the other ones that come afterward are suspect because that one sort of falls apart. So anyway, it is interesting, and I think it's revealing to the extent to which Bigfoot researchers have in some ways sort of just, close their eyes to not just the early hoaxing like Ray Wallace, but also later stuff as well. Why don't we talk about Celestia? Unless you have something, why don't we talk about the Cripplefoot?
The what foot?
That Cripplefoot.
What is that?
What is the Cripplefoot? Matt, take us away. Tell us about the Bossberg tracks.
So the biggest year for Bigfooting would have been 1967 with the tracks found that summer with the double ball, and then later in the fall, the Patterson-Gimlin film. 1969 was also a big year for Bigfoot because in Bosburg, Washington, there were a huge number, something over 1,000, I think, tracks found, I believe, in snow that showed a normal shaped foot plus what they came to call a crippled foot, a deformed foot, and it was associated with a gentleman named Ivan Marks, and that comes into the story later. But plaster casts were made, and at this time, Grover Krantz seized upon the situation because what he did is he took a cast and he said, well, from this cast, I can infer a skeleton, a skeletal structure of this deformed, perhaps club-footed Bigfoot, right? There are various skeptical rejoinders to this. My own skeptical rejoinder: it is possible to impute a skeleton into Charlie Brown, right? The macrocephalic head and the funny proportions. So, and there are other more sophisticated rejoinders to that by Krantz. But what a lot of these Bigfooters just fail to acknowledge or even notice, which becomes amazingly obvious when you see it, because at the same time as the presence of these tracks in Bosburg, Washington, where Ivan Marks just happened to live at that time, Ivan Marks said, I have a film of Bigfoot. This is only 2 years after Patterson. So it's like, wow, okay, well, Patterson did it. Why not this other guy? So he says, I have this film, and that's a whole story in and of itself. But when it finally was revealed, it was showing this creature, this image, this subject of the film, kind of wobbling and hobbling along a surface, and it was so poorly done. It was so amateurish that anybody who saw it just instantly recognized, well, this is a bad costume. And we've all grown up with TV. We've all seen professional Hollywood costuming, so we all have kind of a sense of what constitutes a professional Hollywood production versus just a really hokey, amateurish production. And Ivan Marks was also one of these guys, kind of like Paul Freeman. He made multiple films of what he claimed were Bigfoot. He was experiencer, right? And none of them looked as professional as the Patterson-Gimlin footage. They just were very hokey, and he was kind of ignored. So here's a weird dichotomy within Bigfootery. As far as I know, most Bigfoot advocates still like to say, oh, well, Grover Krantz nailed it with this Cripplefoot copy, but they don't like to acknowledge this film, which just happens to show a crippled quote Bigfoot that is just hokey as hell. So to me, that is the end of the story. It's like, well, the whole Cripplefoot was a clever, an imaginative hoax by Ivan Marks because he wants to both produce tracks plus a film of the same thing, and the film shows that it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and so I mean, just to sort of follow up on what Matt was saying is that basically Krantz, again, this is back at the time, Krantz was the pinnacle. This is before I think Jeff Meldrum was coming out in terms of the Bigfoot field. And so his argument, as Matt alluded to a second ago, was that you could tell the skeletal structure based on the tracks. And that's not that's not actually true. That is not a thing that has been proven. You might be able to, you might not be able to. There's lots of different variables in tracks, right? There's substrate, there's wind, there's how deep is the impression. There's any number of variables that could render track completely irrelevant to the skeletal structure above it. But part of it was the argument was, well, it's so weird, no one would have thought to, surely Bigfoot get into accidents. This is, it's such a weird thing. No one could have even thought to do this. And I have a quote here from John Napier, who's a primatologist, and he says, regarding the Cripplefoot, and by the way, this is from Lauren Coleman's book, Bigfoot. He says, it is very difficult to conceive of a hoaxer so subtle, so knowledgeable, and so sick, who would deliberately fake a footprint of this nature. I suppose it's possible, but it is so unlikely that I am prepared to discount it.
Is the translation of that basically your argument is so full of holes it must be right?
It's I can't conceive of someone doing this, so therefore, yeah, it's just anyway. So that's just one of the things, and so one of the things. So in Dave Dagling's book Bigfoot Exposed, which is quite good, he notes that one of the problems with the Krantz analysis is that, as I mentioned, there's no, it is not a known self-evident truth that you can derive a skeletal structure from a print. And Mike Dennett, who we should mention, the late Mike Dennett, one of the pioneering skeptical Bigfoot researchers, did amazing work back in the day. He published in Skeptical Inquirer, and he noted that one of the joints that Krantz used to calculate it, calculate all the different ways in which he thought the bone structure worked, it doesn't even actually touch the ground. In other words, that's not that that it doesn't leave an impression. It might leave an impression on the soft tissue beneath it, but it's like saying, well, look, there's the an elbow or a tibia pushing into the ground. No, it's not. It may or may not be there, but you're not seeing it in the cast. So if it, again, it is inferred, not direct anyway. So before we get into Matt's field experiments, because they are quite interesting, we have photos of those. One thing that struck me, and maybe Matt could speak to this, is when I was in Australia a couple months back for the Australian conference there. I was in the outback, and one of the points of pride is the amazing ability for trackers to the indigenous tribes, not just in Australia but elsewhere, to follow a spore, an animal, across seemingly impossible tracks. And many years ago, I was on a Bigfoot TV show with a guy named Fernando Moreira, and he was a Bigfoot tracker. He was a tracker, not a Bigfoot tracker. But what struck me is when we're talking about Bigfoot tracks, certainly in the last couple decades, for as prominent as they are, and certainly at least historically, these days it's more like finding Bigfoot. What was that? What was that? You know, there's that blur. There's all sorts of that sort of stuff. But if we're just talking about the tracks, what's curious to me is, and again, maybe Matt can speak to this, is how rarely, if ever, actual qualified, competent trackers are brought in to follow the tracks, right? You would think. I mean, there are. That's what they do. That's, you know, they can track a wounded leopard, you know, uh, 80 miles across, you know, rock. My question is, there are people that can do this. This is not supernatural. This is what they do. The question becomes, why aren't Bigfooters hiring these people to say, come, we found this track. Oh my God, we think it's a Bigfoot. Bring in the world's top trackers. I guarantee you that if there's a Bigfoot, if there's a, you know, 8 or 10 foot tall animal somewhere, if these tracks lead somewhere, they'll find it. And yet I am not aware of that ever happening, frankly. And if it is, Matt, do you have any idea on that?
Oh yeah, there's a fascinating standout case where a gentleman named Joel Harden, who wrote a book entitled Tracker, was contacted by the Forest Service in Walla Walla, Washington. So Harden was a member of the border service because he would track people who crossed the border illegally, and he worked for search and rescue where people got lost in the wilderness and they were trying to find a lost person. So two different job descriptions, but you know, his entire book has, as you say, these masterful, amazing, like, how did this person do this? But he was able to find these people in many circumstances. Some people wanted to be found, some people didn't want to be found, and he was able to find the both. So he was brought in by the Forest Service in the 80s. Again, one of these Paul Freeman situations, and he investigated a series of tracks and did various operations on circling around the perimeter. You know, where would the track maker have come into the situation? Where would they have exited? Did all these various things, and he came to the conclusion that the tracks were fabricated. Now he never said Paul Freeman did it, but he did conclude officially that they were fabricated. In his book, on page 140, there is a passage that alludes to Paul Freeman confessing to sheriff's deputies that he had fabricated both a sighting and had fabricated tracks, because there is this mythology within the Bigfoot subculture, and I think even Jeff Meldrum advocates this mythology that, oh, Paul Freeman never confessed. It was a misunderstanding on the Good Morning America show, yada yada. No. According to Joel Harden, page 140, he did in fact confess to sheriff's deputies. So I refer to Paul Freeman as admitted hoaxer Paul Freeman. But you are correct, Ben, that these Bigfoot people have not brought in professional trackers. Now, as a sidebar, in the early 2000s, I knew both Rick Knoll of the Skookumcast fame and his buddy Owen Caddy. Now, Caddy had worked in a game preserve in, I think, like Uganda or something, somewhere in Africa, and he had tracked chimps. And he would tell me the extraordinary things like, well, you know, I can tell by the tracks if a person is right-handed or left-handed by subtle variations in tracks. So he was promoting himself as this exemplary tracker of, and I think that's why Knoll, you know, contacted him. So Owen Caddy has kind of dropped out of the Bigfoot subculture, and I don't know exactly why. Part of his contribution was claiming that the Skookumcast was not only a Bigfoot, but was a male Bigfoot, because his scrotum impressions were found in the soft mud. Now, that's an Owen Caddy thing, right? So later, when it came out by professional analysis by the actual ichnologist, Dr. Anton Wroblewski, that is in fact an elk, so we realized that no, it's actually not the scrotal impression of a male Bigfoot, which you know, and that becomes the laughing stock of the professional ichnology community. So a guy
you've already said he has 2 balls in his feet. So
Fair enough.
I mean,
Very
it
good.
stands to reason. Yeah.
Very good. So but Ben's assertion is correct that it doesn't seem to be that these Bigfoot people bring in professional trackers. They all seem to think, well, I'm an incredible outdoorsman myself. I'm just going to do it myself.
Well, you mentioned it's highly competitive. If
Yep.
they brought in a professional tracker and something was found, then the tracker would get the credit.
Good point. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me just add one other quick thing. As long as I have the Bluff Creek thing here now, obviously, those who are listening to this can't see it, but for those who gave us a couple bucks to watch the video, one thing that's interesting about this is just how flat the foot is. Celestia, can you?
I can sort of see the yeah, it's a very flat foot. There's no arch.
Does this look real to you? Because
yeah,
it
it
doesn't
does.
look real to me.
It looks like a real paperweight. It looks like a real item that you can buy on
Well, here's
online,
one
I'm
of the
sure.
things that now again, one can argue, well, we don't know that Bigfoot don't have unusually flat feet. Okay. I mean, yeah, we don't know that their tracks don't look exactly like you would expect hoaxer tracks to look like, right? But at some point, you have to say, well, hold on here, right? And so the question becomes, what sort of substrate are we talking about? How big is this creature, right? What's the weight? And there's lots of analyses you can bring on the stride length. There's all sorts of different calculations you can make. But at the end of the day, some of these are just so self-evidently unrealistic. And yet, again, here's the other problem, right? If this clearly fake-looking track was indeed found at the scene of the Patterson Gimlin film, that does not support the credibility of the Patterson Gimlin film, right? It's like, first of all, which is suspect to begin with, and that's a topic for another show. But if you not only do you have and it's like Matt was talking about the Freeman or the Marks case, right? You the video and film is so terrible. Like, this wouldn't fool a 5-year-old. So why in the hell would you even give the tracks a second look? It's just,
well, I'm going to get a little bit Christian here and ask you guys to think about footprints in the sand.
oh, okay.
As you're walking along the beach and you see the footprints you've left behind, whether or not you're walking with Jesus, they don't look like a Bigfoot cast because your heel hits the ground with a lot of force, because most of your weight goes, as you hit with your heel, and then you pull up and your toes kind of scrunch a little bit. You're not walking like this. You're walking like, it's a motion where your heel goes down and hits your ball of your foot. It rolls onto the ball of your foot, and then your toes kind of scrunch as your foot is leaving the ground. And so that's why footprints on the sand, if you want to get a really cool image of your footprint, you just take your foot and you stomp it down and you carefully lift it all up at the same time.
That's
so
right.
You're making like a mold. And none of these prints that I have seen, none of these casts look like my footprints on the beach. How did Bigfoot print enthusiasts explain this? Like, the total lack of evidence of mobility.
Well, they just throw out the claim. Oh, there's individual variation between tracks. Like toe flexion is a common term these guys use.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, jump into that one. That's a great one.
But as soon as you want to jump into the Elb situation, that's one of those characteristics.
Yeah, what is the Elb? How do you spell that?
ELBE.
What is the Elb situation?
Elb is a small community in western Washington.
Okay.
Where a series of tracks was found in, I believe, September 2012. Okay. And I was actually privy to them early on, not by the track maker, but by an associate of the track maker. So I knew this was going on, right? So at this time, people on Bigfoot forums were exclaiming how amazing these tracks were. There were a number of individuals. One of these alpha footers named Derek Randalls said he thought they were excellent tracks. They were real. Another Cliff Barrickman, he's one of the Finding Bigfoot guys. He's still one of the alpha footers. He also acknowledged that they were real. And photographs of the tracks were sent to Jeff Meldrum, who exclaimed how good they looked. I think he even said something like, "Oh, they're some kind of a Rosetta Stone. They're so good. They're so good." Okay. Well, a few days went by and the excitement began to wane. But during that period, these alpha footers started making comments on Bigfoot forums as to how amazing this track find was. Rick Knoll of Skookumcast fame actually said he saw dermal ridges in these tracks. Okay.
Oh, the old toe prints. Okay.
Dermal ridges, right? The friction ridge skin in these tracks. Okay. Um, but then the situation began to fall apart a little bit. And it wasn't because Bigfooters said, well, these look like they're stomped from wooden fake stompers. No, it had to do with uh, claiming an email came from a certain IP address that matched the IP address of another guy, right? That's how the case was cracked. As soon as it was determined by these alpha footers, the thread on Bigfoot forums was made to go away. It was made to go away. So if today you go to Google and you type in Elb Bigfoot or Elb Bigfoot hoax, you will get very, very few results. There was a gentleman on the James Randi Educational Foundation forum named Ray Gavel, who, thank goodness, wrote a summary of what these people were saying and when, and that survives. Many years ago, Michael Dennett said, "Matt, you want to print out this stuff on the internet?" And I thought, "Oh, that's excessive. That'll be there forever." Well, Michael Dennett was absolutely 100% correct because some of these top Bigfooters, including Rick Knoll and Cliff Barrickman, Derek Randalls, and Jeff Meldrum, all fell for this hoax. Now, as it happened, these tracks were made by a old school '60s wooden rigid prosthetic. It wasn't done with high tech silicone flexible composites. It wasn't microcard with dermal ridges on it to emulate dermal ridges. No, no, it's like an old school Ray Wallace hoax. And these Bigfooters were not only putting dermal ridges in it, they were saying, "Oh, well, there's toe flexion. We're seeing toe flexion and individual variation in these tracks." And so, to me, this is something that deserves wider recognition in the small world of Bigfoot skepticism, because the Bigfooters like Brian Brown of Bigfoot forums did a damn good job of, nothing here to see, folks. Hoaxers bad. Hoaxer bad. Nothing to see. Do not ignore the man behind the curtain. No, because the Bigfoot forums thread had a written account of how all these guys fell for it. So there was no toe flexion. There was none. They just looked at it and said, "Oh, I see toe flexion. Oh, I see dermal ridges." I don't. There's a term these guys like to use. Even advocates like to use. They say Bigfoot on the brain. Okay, you're out in the woods. You believe in Bigfoot. You're looking for Bigfoot, and suddenly you hear a crack or you hear a noise. Oh, it's Bigfoot! It's Bigfoot! You see motion out of the periphery of your vision. Oh, it's Bigfoot! That's called Bigfoot on the brain. So I actually don't know if a guy like Rick Knoll has Bigfoot on the brain to the extent that he just sees dermal ridges in these sediments, or if he's a liar. I don't know. I am not going to accuse the man of lying. I don't know what's in his mind, but I do not trust what he has to say about the subject. This is the guy who promoted the Skookum cast, and this is a guy later who put dermal ridges in a known wooden prosthetic fake set of tracks.
It reminds me of the famous case of the Martian canals, where people were seeing the telescope. I see the canals on Mars. No, no, you don't. You don't.
That's right. Yeah, that's an excellent example.
Well, it doesn't necessarily even seem like it needs to be pareidolia or a filter that you're putting on your own thinking and interpretation. It seems like there's a lot of motivated reasoning to find whatever little piece of evidence will To jump real quick to folk art and folk artists, I feel like I'm arming the enemy here, but I don't view hoaxers necessarily as the enemy because I love some of this strange stuff. If you're going to build a Bigfoot stomper, segment it, have the heel and the toes and everything move independently, and then walk down the beach, or wherever you're walking with it, and make them messy. Don't make them so like they're Instagrammable footprints the way that they're showing up. And yeah, just that's I'd be curious to see what a wooden model like that would look like, because I can imagine how to engineer it. It's not hard to think about.
Speaking of which, before we go, Matt, you have done some really interesting experiments. Can you talk about some of the research and tracks you've done?
Yeah, I've done a small amount of track making experiments, both with rigid prosthetics and with flexible prosthetics. And with the rigid, I it was a kind of a Ray Wallace thing, just cut out a shape, and I didn't even put cuts between the toes because that's Ray Wallace did his like that. But a number of these Paul Freeman tracks from the 80s show tracks that are missing vegetation in the bottom of the track. So imagine a forest floor, there's fine organic material, litter, as they say, on the forest floor. A compressive event pushes down the track. Well, you're going to see squished organic material in the bottom of the track. Uh, Not many more than one of these Paul Freeman tracks had almost no organic material in the bottom of the track. This is not just my opinion. This is this was noticed by a professional wildlife biologist. I can't remember the name, and also by this Joel Harden guy, right? So that was a big red flag. So I made a test in my front yard where I took this 14-inch wooden prosthetic and I put it on the ground. I jumped up and down on it. I jumped up and down on it, just pounded into the ground. And as a test, I put my tennis shoed foot adjacent to it. So my foot has almost nothing, and then this thing is deeply in the ground. So if a hoaxer is out in the wilderness and you find a very non-compliant substrate, you can do it, one by one. You just, jump, jump, jump. You move 5 feet, jump, jump, jump. Paul Freeman probably did the easy way out because he excavated the tracks, thus no organic material. He first excavated, then he shaped them. Now that's and Paul Freeman was a very imaginative guy.
Like, just so I can understand this, like when you say he excavated the tracks, like reductive sculpting, he was scooping dirt out to make a track look like it had compressed the ground, when in actuality he had
Yeah,
scraped the ground out. Oh,
exactly. Yes. So he's removing the dirt, thus giving him the depth. Because all these Bigfoot people, oh, well, Bigfoot's a monster. It makes monstrously deep tracks. Now, in some cases, the tracks are actually too deep. They're too deep for a biologically relevant. If you want to go into that domain, read David Degling's book in his analysis of the Patterson tracks. It's excellent. It's better than me. But that's what almost. I'm completely convinced that's what Freeman was doing. He was excavating, and I've got a forthcoming essay coming out, hosted by CSI, Ben's employer, on in print, and I finally got my hands on some very good photographs that were taken of a track that was associated with Paul Freeman. So not only is there organic matter missing from the bottom of the track, but the track is directly over a big rock. Okay, so let's think about this carefully. So now we have Bigfoot's foot supposedly compresses itself over a rock, conforms down the rock, and makes a compressive event track at the base of the rock. It makes no sense whatsoever. The material that you would need to do that would be like silly putty, right? It's a physical impossibility. I actually speculate that Meldrum knew that he was fooling Krantz and Meldrum, and my own speculation is that he's like, how badly can I fool them? How ridiculous a track! how absurdly, obscenely ridiculous can I make? Oh, let's make one that's over a rock where the foot is like silly putty. And
It'd be like stepping on a Lego in the forest.
Hmm.
yes, it would be. And you would have to have a foot that perfectly conformed around the Lego and yet made a track at the base of the Lego. You can actually do this as a test. You can go into your kitchen and grab a fork and with your bare foot just poke the tines of the fork into your heel. And you will notice that the flesh of your heel tents. The tines of the fork act like tent poles, and it tents. It does not conform perfectly around to the base of the fork. So that's what my forthcoming essay is about: is how ridiculously absurd this Paul Freeman stuff was.
This has been fascinating. I always love talking to you. You're always just this fount of knowledge, and you just, page 145, he does this. Like, it just,
Yeah, I'm very impressed with your recall and also just your appreciation of some of this stuff as folk art. That jibes with me. I like it.
Well, there, in my opinion, the best advocate book on the subject is one called "Know the Sasquatch" by a Canadian gentleman named Chris Murphy. And the reason I hold that is I hold it's even better than Meldrum's book is that it's very, very well illustrated because he managed to get his hands on very high quality color photographs and it's been printed on glossy paper. So you, for both advocate and skeptic and just everybody in between, you can just look at this stuff and really see what's going on. So there is a really, really good chapter about footprints. And there's an irony here because Murphy is an advocate, and he, in his mind, he believes that this is good evidence. This is good evidence for the advocate position. In my view, it's just the opposite because it shows the enormous morphological variation that Ben alludes to earlier in our conversation. And Celestia, you as an artist would see these things immediately just because it differs in the angle that the toes are at in the front, the angle where the ball angles back to the heel, the circle, how big the circle is, or is it an ellipse at the bottom? You've got an infinite number of French curves that you can use when you're cutting out your wooden prosthetic. And so, if you want to go down that direction, yeah, Know the Sasquatch by Chris Murphy.
Feet are one of the hardest things to learn how to draw in life drawing class. That you can spend an hour on somebody's foot and not get it right. Jack Davis drew the best cartoon foot. If Jack Davis wanted to hoax a Bigfoot track, he would do a great job, but he's no longer with us.
thankfully not.
But Matt, where can people find more of you? Do you have any forums yourself or places you like to throw out?
Not really. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, but I used to have a website that was largely devoted to some of the Bigfoot skepticism, and I no longer have it. It was too expensive to maintain. So Bigfoot forums is no longer the only monopoly of the subject on the internet. A lot of these groups now migrate to Facebook, and a lot of these Facebook Bigfoot groups seem to be like scams. They're AI generated nonsense, and they're selling T-shirts or something. It's like the money's going to people in Pakistan or Somalia or something. So there's only one good one. It's a gentleman in California named Stephen Streufert. Has one called the Coalition for the, what is it, Ben? Coalition for
Rational Bigfoot researcher or something. It's quite good.
yeah, critical Bigfoot studies. So I do participate on that forum on Facebook.
Okay, good to know. And what AI is doing for thought communities like this is a whole other story.
Yeah,
that's a whole nother episode, and maybe we'll have you back in a year or so to talk about it.
Well, it's anybody with a brain now realizes that the class of evidence of still photographs of supposed Bigfoot is dead because it is simply so easy to make a plausible image. I mean, the Bigfoot photographs always existed in what Mick West calls the low information zone, the LIZ. They were always at a distance. They were always blurry. They were always slightly out of focus. The Mitch Hedberg joke, ha ha ha, I've heard that 10,000 times. Well, that's all true, right? Bigfoot is always on the, except for maybe the Patterson film, its own subject of inquiry, it's always in the LIZ, right? So now it is ridiculously easy to make an AI Bigfoot that exists in the low information zone. And so you need better evidence. You just need better evidence.
Video too now. All right. Well, Matt, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for giving us some time.
Thank you. I enjoyed this.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, this was super cool. And hopefully we'll be slugging in many of the photos you provided and checking it. It's just, I've been wanting to do this topic, especially with you, for years now. And so I'm glad we're finally circling back. And again, the piece that you wrote for Skeptical Inquirer, it should be on the website. I didn't actually tell you this. I meant to tell you this before. I got a message back from Steve Hupp, the editor. He says, yes, it's been accepted. It's in the process, and good job.
Good. Excellent. Thank you. I'll see you two guys later.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you, friends, for listening and for supporting our advertisement-free podcast. To help us stay that way, please visit patreon.com and check out our rewards. And remember, it costs $0 to recommend us to a friend, give us a review, or mention us on social media. If you have comments or suggested topics, join our Squaring the Strange podcast discussion group on Facebook. Squaring the Strange is a production of Two Heads Studio, LLC, copyright 2017 to 2025. Our theme music is provided by Shriekback. Additional music by Memory, Keytard and Feathered, and Pasquale Romero. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of Squaring the Strange and do not necessarily reflect the views of Two Heads Studio, Center for Inquiry, or any other affiliated organizations or employers.